All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming today. My name is Michelle Williams, and I'm presenting today Nutrition and the Musculoskeletal System, otherwise known as the MSK system. This part of our body includes all of our bones, our joints, our muscles, ligaments, tendons, um, as far as the system itself. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, of course, this is what makes up our body, right? It's the connective tissues and everything that help our bones move. It helps our muscle function. When we allow trying to do any sort of movement, whether it's as small as moving our fingers or going for a marathon, this is the system that helps us do that. In addition to that very important function, it is also the part of the body that protects most of our internal organs, right? So when we think about our brain, it's being encapsulated by our skull, which is part of the MSK system, as well as, say, our stomach, liver, kidneys, etc. So our bones are living tissues. They are predominantly um, provide the structure and support of our body. How our bones are shaped tends to not only shape how we are, but also how tall we get, how long our bones are, and so on and so forth. They are composed primarily of calcium, phosphorus, and a few other minerals, which we'll talk a little bit more about, which is why we need those as part of our nutrition. And then, of course, we also are made up of our muscles. Those are soft tissue that enable our movement to occur, provide our posture, support for our body. They also are made up of fibers. So when we think about bones, they're a little bit bigger in size. Our muscles are very tiny little fibers that are all kind of stuck together that are then attached to our bone through our connective tissue. So the fibers and is what has the nerves and nerve endings in them. And so when our brain sort of sends a message to move a part of our body, that contracts the muscle in such a way to allow our body to do whatever the signal was. Of course, all of this stuff happens in a matter of, probably 6 nanoseconds. But our we have three different types of muscles in our body. We have skeletal muscles, which of course are those that are attached to our skeleton. We have smooth muscle, which is generally like what our digestive system, our small intestine, eyeballs, things like that are made of. And then we have cardiac muscle, which of course is the muscle surrounding our heart or making up our heart. Then, of course, we have connective tissue. And again, these are the sort of pieces that connect everything to everything else. So ligaments, tendons, cartilage, all of that sort of falls into the umbrella term of connective tissue. The connective tissue plays a role in supporting the body. It stores fat for energy and for use later, and it helps us move substances between our tissues. And then, of course, plays a role in repairing any damaged tissue that we have. Every day we do things with our body. Sometimes we bang our arm on something that creates an injury or damage, and the connective tissue is the primary way that the connective tissue can heal itself uh, from whatever we happen to do that day. Okay, so of course, why does the musculoskeletal system matters? At the end of the day, because for a lot of people, when something aches or hurts, a big part of this is happening in the MSK system. And ultimately, of course, it underpins the basic pieces of being a human. I mean, it helps us to move from point A to point B. It helps us to do gross motor movement and fine motor movement. It helps us participate in daily life. When our MSK system doesn't work well, either for a neurological reason or for a physiological reason, it can have an impact on our independence, our social relationships, activities, working, sleep, and pretty much every other aspect of life. So maintaining a healthy MSK system means that we're protecting our muscles and our bones and our joints from damage over time. Now, of course, as we age, some of these things happen just because that's the normal process of aging. But if we can prevent the degradation of this part of the system for to make it later in life, then we tend to feel a little bit better. Um, it's interesting to say that I don't know if it's number five or number six, but it's a top claim for insurance companies to pay for people that have some issue with their MSK. Either they have a joint problem, or they have arthritis, or they have a broken bone, or they have lower back pain, upper back pain, neck pain, etc. And so these things are pretty chronic and or acute for people. So it's really important to practice stability and make sure that, whatever it is that we're doing throughout the day, we're doing it with proper form and we're feeding ourselves the correct nutrients that we need, which is really our focus for today, to make sure that this part of our body heals well, is protected from damage, and, doesn't, um, uh, you know, have sort of a decline as is typical as we get older. We want to sort of slow down that process as much as possible, and a big part of that, of course, is what we are eating from day to day. But in general, about 70% of people will suffer from some sort of MSK injury or difficulty throughout their lifetime. And of course, that can cause a lot of issues with sort of people's overall lifestyle and the pain that they experience from time to time. So we want to really make sure that we understand proper posture and proper uh, uh, lifting techniques and nutrition overall for this part of our body. So let's get a little further into that overall. All right. So, like I mentioned, the MSK system really needs three basic things: proper nutrition, which we're going to talk about in more detail today. But we also need regular exercise. When we move our body and we use our muscles and we use our joints, we are actually helping them because that's what they need. And sort of that use it or lose it phenomenon is real in that way, right? When we limit our movement because of pain or just because we're exhausted or because we just aren't somebody who wants to be active, or we live a sedentary lifestyle, that slowly degrades the pieces of the system that will then basically enhance the difficulties that we're having. So we really want to try to move as much as possible. And then ultimately, stretching is extremely valuable. I always kind of give people the illustration of saying, you have tendons and ligaments that are very tiny fibers that connect muscle to bone, like I said before. And so if you haven't been stretching that out, over time they sort of get smaller or shorter. And so that when you do use them, it causes pain or it snaps and causes an injury. And so we really want to keep up our stretching as much as possible so that we have more free movement. And then, of course, when our ligaments and tendons are, as stretchy as they could possibly be, they're not regularly pulling on our muscles, which is what for most people create pain. So if you think about like folks that have lower back pain, a lot of the pain is just kind of there. It's not from a particular injury or a car accident. It's just chronic pain. That often happens because the system hasn't been stretched in a long time. And over time, those tendons and ligaments become less flexible. And so then, just in their natural state, they're sort of pulling on muscle and our joints. And that causes some of the chronic pain that people experience. So the more we stretch and the more regularly we stretch, usually that can at least make some of that experience happen much later in life, right? Like if we're doing things right, most of those types of issues don't occur until over the age of 60 or so. But for a lot of us, we're sitting all day, we're not stretching, we don't get proper nutrition, we're not doing regular physical activity and movement. And so some of those issues occur earlier in life. Okay, so some common concerns that people struggle with as in relationship to our MSK. Of course, joint pain is probably number one. Lots of people have pain in their knees and their hips, shoulders, etc. Lower back pain is pretty common, especially for people who are sitting at computers all day, which, unfortunately is probably 80% of America as far as the available positions that people have for their jobs. Carpal tunnel syndrome is a big one. A lot of that actually comes from the mouse use. So, just so that everyone knows, carpal tunnel occurs here in your wrist. And so there's like a little tunnel that sort of holds open where the nerves go through and the ligaments and tendons sort of get to your forearm bone, etc. And so when we are doing this all day and we put pressure on this part of our hand, that can slowly collapse the tunnel, which then touches the nerve, which then causes that pain. And so most people, when they get to that level, they have to have a carpal tunnel syndrome surgery where they sort of go in and they re-lift the tunnel so that it's not touching the nerve so that it doesn't create the pain. Muscular weakness is a big one as well, and most often that's caused by poor nutrition or maybe not getting the different types of nutrients that your body needs. And then, of course, sprains and strains are pretty common, and those are generally speaking, due to some sort of maybe sports injury or recreational activity injury or car accident, etc. Okay, so why is nutrition important? Of course, nutrition is important for a whole bunch of reasons. It is you are what you eat. I mean, I just love that saying, even though it's probably 40 years old and I'm aging myself, but it really does mean everything. Every single cell in your body is using particular nutrients to help it do what it needs to do. So, in relationship to the MSK system, the most common ones that it uses to function well include calcium, which of course we probably know, vitamin D, protein, omega-3 fatty acids, and then of course some antioxidant foods. So we're going to talk about all of those in a little more detail. So these are the basic ones that are really helpful to support our joint health and bone health. So omega-3s, calcium, antioxidants, vitamin C, I didn't mention before, healthy fats. Those are the things that we really want to try to get as much out of as possible. We want to try to limit things like sugar, excess salt, refined grains, red meat, and processed food. The reason for that is because sugar and many of these refined grains and alcohol, red meat, etc., do cause a systemic inflammatory response. And when our body is inflamed, we tend to feel more pain because everything is pushing on something else instead of it being sort of the size that it's supposed to be. So if you think about kind of typical joint pain, it's sort of like a throbbing, hot pain, is it probably a good way to describe it? And that's because the joints are, instead of them being this big, they're this big, they're inflamed, either due to injury or what our nutrition is. And so that's causing some of that pain because it's filling up the vessel more than what it's supposed to. So we want to try to avoid the things that cause inflammation and make sure that we're getting all of the things that help our MSK system function well. So let's talk about calcium first. Calcium, of course, is probably the mineral that we need the most of. We are made up of a lot of calcium. All of our bones are very calcium heavy in that way. So, of course, plays a crucial role in our overall bone health. But it is a major player in bone strength and in bone structure. And as we age, our bones are sort of breaking down a little bit. And so making sure that we're getting regular amounts of calcium throughout our lifetime can really make sure that our bones stay stronger later in life. I'm sure you've heard of the disorders and diseases, osteopenia, osteoporosis. Those are basically the wearing down of our bone structure, and calcium plays a very big role in that. The recommended daily amount for calcium varies based on age and gender, but generally for adults, we're looking at about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams per day. For children, it's typically a little more because their bones are growing at such a fast pace until they become, the full height that they might be. And then women who are nursing would need just a little bit more, so between the 1,000 and 1,300. Good sources of calcium are, of course, dairy products, but also keep in mind that you can get a lot of calcium from things like dark leafy greens, different fishes, fishes that have smaller bones. And if you eat the little tiny bones, then that can be good as well. Sardines, fortified foods like orange juice. Some cereals have added calcium. They did this because a lot of people weren't getting enough. And so they thought, okay, well, let's add it to, excuse me, let's add it to some foods so that people have more of an ability to get as much as they need. Okay, with vitamin D, vitamin D is actually very, very important, and we're seeing more and more people have a deficiency, particularly women. We're not 1,000% sure on why this is occurring, but we do know that um, for some people, it's not necessarily the amount that they take in through their diet, it's how their body uses what's taken in. And for other people, it's more that they're just not getting enough of it. So, we recommend, most health professionals will recommend that you get a vitamin D deficiency test with your annual checkup. Again, particularly if you're a woman, but really important for everybody overall. And, we're looking for a particular number and I think that, this it's important for everyone to recognize that the supplement world, because that's where you're going to get, if you're not getting these things through your natural diet, or in the case of vitamin D from the sun, then you're probably being recommended to take a supplement. And it's important for everyone to know that the United States government does not dictate what uh, any regulation on supplements. So that means that, anyone could stick anything in a capsule, slap a label on the bottle, and if a store will sell it, then boom, there you go. And so it's important to make sure that you're finding a brand that is um, reputable and has been shown to actually pass some sort of rigorous testing. There's a couple of different, little side labels on the bottles that will say the National Science Association, or there's a couple other ones that are specific to say, like, hey, we took this particular vitamin D brand, we put it through rigorous testing, and we know that it does indeed have X number of IU in this particular brand. I will also say that it's important to recognize if you have a hard time taking in the vitamin. So again, remember I said before that some people aren't taking enough in, but other people are taking enough in, but it's not being used by their body well. For people who have been regularly taking vitamin D supplements and they still see that their number is deficient, then they may try something like a sublingual type, where that's like a liquid dropper that they put under their tongue, because that goes direct into your bloodstream. Whereas when you take a capsule or a pill, that goes through your digestive system, and perhaps if you have poor gut health or you have too much acidic acid in your stomach, by the time the actual supplement gets broken down, we've lost X% of what was in there. So if you find yourself like in that place, then you may want to switch to a liquid form of these different supplements. But good sources, of course, for vitamin D, number one and first and foremost, is the sun. Keep in mind that for a lot of people, they are wearing products that have SPF in them. So maybe your face makeup or your regular lotion has SPF. And so when you're wearing SPF, then you're definitely not getting the vitamin D part of the sunshine. But other good sources include salmon, tuna, mackerel, eggs, liver, if you can if you can get there. Liver is actually quite honestly one of the best and most healthy foods. I personally can't get there, but if you can, that's great. Mushrooms, there are fortified foods that have vitamin D in them. And like I said, the sun. Okay, so moving on to vitamin K, we don't hear a lot about vitamin K overall, but it is an important fat soluble vitamin, and it plays a crucial role in blood clotting and bone health. So, of course, people who have bleeding disorders probably are very clued into vitamin K, but I don't think it's one of the sort of main vitamins that people really talk about. But it does play a role in producing the proteins that are needed for blood clotting and also for maintaining bone structure and bone health in older adults. So the recommended daily intake of vitamin K is about 120 micrograms for men and 90 micrograms for women, including those who are pregnant or breastfeeding. Good sources of vitamin K, and I want you to sort of start noticing some of the correlations here, right? But good sources are green leafy vegetables. You've heard me say that before with some of the vitamins that we've mentioned, calcium and vitamin D, spinach, kale, collard greens, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, kiwi. So what I always tell our clients is I'll say, hey, if you feel like you're not getting enough of X vitamin or X mineral, go into your search engine, say fiber-rich foods or vitamin K-rich foods or whatever it is that you're looking for, so that you can get a list of the different foods that are available. And then you can say to yourself, okay, I like this, I don't like this, and just try to put as many of those foods that are high in these items that you also enjoy eating into your weekly diet. So next, of course, protein is a big part of all of this. Protein is the, basic building block of all things body, right? But particularly crucial for musculoskeletal function because it supports muscle growth and repair, and it contributes to bone health. So we really need the recommended amount of protein. Now, I will say, I think most people are getting plenty of protein because we have a very meat-rich diet. But just something to pay attention to. You can get protein in two different sources, from animal sources, plant sources. So of course, any animal source will be a complete protein. When you hear people say that, it means that they have all of the different types of amino acids that our body needs for best function. Plant sources, on the other hand, are probably, healthier because they have less saturated fat, generally speaking, but they may not be complete. So they may be missing one or two or four amino acids. So if you're vegan, then you really want to make sure that you're getting a full profile of your amino acids, because those, of course, are all very important as well. But great sources for protein that are plant sources include quinoa, edamame, soy, legumes, seeds, nuts. The list can go on and on. There's a lot of discussion around how much protein people need, but when I check different sources internationally, on average, the recommendation is zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So that kind of comes out to around 1 gram per every 2 pounds of body weight. Um, yes, you can get too much protein. It can cause kidney problems. It can cause bad breath, headaches, constipation, etc. So, just like with everything, we want to be in that balance range. We don't want to have too little and we don't want to have too much, because both ends of that scale can be um, um, a predictor in future health on some level or another. And just remember that we really want to focus our protein on low saturated fat sources. So looking at sort of our eggs and chicken, plant sources and fish versus, pork and ground beef and other forms of steaks and et cetera. So just try to think about, saturated fat, of course, can cause a lot of buildup in our cholesterol and then in our cardiovascular system. So we just want to make sure that we're balancing the types of protein that we're eating overall. Magnesium is also pretty important for this system. And again, I think we've heard much more about magnesium in the last year or two than really I ever have. I've been teaching health education for over 20 years, but magnesium is an essential nutrient overall, and it is very important in muscle and nerve function. It helps with energy production. So, a lot of people will say, I have muscular fatigue or I'm tired, etc. And that could be all sorts of different things, but it could be that there's not enough magnesium going into the body. Uh, Magnesium overall is involved in 300 different reactions within the body. So it's a very important nutrient. It is considered, they talk about macronutrients and micronutrients. It is a micronutrient, so we need less of it than, say, of protein, fat, or carbohydrates. But in general, between about 300 and 400 milligrams per day is the estimated need. And good sources of magnesia include dark chocolate, which is always exciting, I guess. Avocados, almonds, cashews, legumes, seeds, um, and then of course some fatty fish and whole grains overall. Phosphorus is also crucial for the MSK system, and certainly one that we hear much less about than some of the other ones that I've mentioned already. But its role is really in working with calcium together to encourage strong bones, and also plays a big role in our the density of our teeth. It also has a lot to do with how our muscles contract through nerve function. So if we're not getting enough phosphorus, that can lead to some nerve um, miscommunication with our muscles. The phosphorus helps convert food into energy. So if we don't have enough, we can feel um, under we can feel like aren't getting enough energy to do the essential functions that we're trying to do. And it's also help balances our electrical function between our nerves. So, I mean, that plays a pretty major role in our life overall. Good sources of phosphorus include dairy products, lentils, seafood, eggs, different seeds and nuts, and then tofu. So just some final recommendations as you try to protect your MSK system the best. First and foremost, we really want to try to stretch every single day. So, a nice 10-minute stretch at night before we go to bed, and maybe like a 2 or 3 minute stretch in the morning can do wonders. I tell people a lot that most of our pain, unless we have some sort of inflammation or injury or something going on with the way our body was made. Most of it is caused by just feeling tight. So the more that we can stretch our body, we can really pay attention to our posture when we're sitting at work, or when we're driving in the car, when we're standing. Those things all play a major role. And then outside of that, if we can encourage ourselves to get this nutrition regularly and have as much of it as we possibly can fit into our diet, that can really help with our overall function as well. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of information that will be useful for you. I appreciate everyone's time today, and I do see that there is one chat here. Oh, and somebody asked about weighted vest for walking. So I think those are great. Ankle weights, a weighted vest, if you feel up to that. I think those things are really good. Anything that encourages more muscle use, as long as we're supporting that muscle use with good nutrition and stretching as well. Thank you guys so much for your questions, and I appreciate your time today. And thank you very much. Take care.